Hi all, hope you've been staying safe and well. Today we're going to have a look at another one of the Inspector Calls theme style questions, and we're going to have a look at one of the big themes within the play, which is the idea of social class. So this links very nicely to the essay that we looked at on responsibility and how Priestley's critiquing society at the time of 1912, when the play was set, and 1945 when it was written, a time of massive social division between the different classes, and Priestley's using the play to critique that and to challenge that. So you might well get an essay which is looking at this idea of social class and particularly social division. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a look, like we did last time, at a big question, and then I'm going to talk you through my essay plan, and then at the end you'll be able to see the completed essay plan, and then your task is going to be to go away and to have a look at your own. I hope it's really useful, and it'll revise some of those key ideas and key themes to do with social class. Okay, so where do we begin? What we've got to consider is the importance of social class at the time that Priestley is writing. Obviously, division between the classes was a huge part of British society at the time. We're talking about a time where women didn't have the vote, where wealth was very, very unevenly distributed. We're looking at the lack of social mobility, the fact that people didn't very easily move between classes, that you were very much born into a particular class and generally you stayed there. We have a few sort of hints at the fact that Mr. Burling has actually moved up classes due to his work in the factory. The fact that his wife is seen as his social superior is one of those hints and ideas there. So we're going to have a look at a question considering the importance of social class and how it is presented to us as an audience. So it's going to be really useful to have a look at that and break it down into its component parts. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is to introduce our big idea, our big topic. So essentially, what is social class and why is it so important to the play? So what I've got here is my key notes on social class here. So in green, we've got my big ideas. This is what I think that Priestley's trying to get at. He's saying that Priestley believes the divide between the classes is too great, and that division creates a sense of inequality. Underneath, I've got the context that in 1912 and in 1945 there is a great divide between social classes. Now we might want to get a little bit more depth in there and consider specific examples, the idea of the rights to vote, the idea of lack of social mobility, the idea of lack of fair distribution of wealth, the lack of a social welfare state, so there's no national health service, all these sorts of things that we can link into. We can talk about industrialisation and how it led to a greater gulf in class as well because of people rushing to cities and living in slums. There's lots of things we could bring in here. I've also got at the top the Burling's faith in class system and the idea that he describes, Mr. Burling describes the Titanic as unsinkable, a metaphor potentially for social class and the sort of upper classes coming to an unseen iceberg that's going to undermine their social status. Some other key vocabulary I've got is injustice, prejudice and capitalism, which I will try and link into my introduction and try and bring all these ideas together about what Priestley's big message and big ideas are. Okay, so my first big idea that I have here is the idea that members of the upper classes see themselves as superior, and that they see the lower classes as inferior and less human, if you like, less powerful and less important in their day-to-day lives. So we have Mr. Burling's obsession with his social status, the fact that he sees himself as in a good chance of a knighthood, and the fact that he consistently refers to his social status as like an alderman, Lord Mayor, and the fact that he sees the knighthood as maybe the final piece of his puzzle where he's going to become this finally be accepted by the upper classes. One of the first things that he feels once he learns about the death of Eva Smith is, there goes the chance of my knighthood. The fact that he's worried about the fact that there will be a scandal indicates that he sees himself as superior, as better than this. He also refers to the fact that they will soon be asking for the earth, as if it's his privilege, the social status that he belongs to dish out wealth, to dish out care and affection, all these different sort of things. The fact that he sees the lower classes as completely inferior to him. He refers to the idea of them being like a community, like bees in a hive, and refers to them as cranks, the socialists who would prefer to see a greater social mobility. He uses his social status to try and intimidate the inspector by saying, "I play golf with the chief inspector." All these sorts of ideas indicating that Mr. Burling sees himself as socially superior and then therefore morally superior to the lower working classes. He even indicates that he feels that we are in for a time of steadily increasing prosperity due to capitalist values and due to the division between the two social classes, or the many social classes. Okay, my second big idea that I've looked at is the fact that the upper classes have prejudices about members of the lower classes. So not only do they see themselves as superior and privileged in that sense, but also they have underlying prejudices about the people who are members of the lower classes. And a lot of that is to do with the fact that they see that the lower classes don't have the same morals and values that they do. They're not, they can't be considered good people, if you like. So, for example, Mrs. Burling, when describing Eva Smith, described as girls of that sort, as if they have some sort of moral corruption, as if they are very morally different to the Burling family and the Mrs. Burling in particular. She even says that she was giving herself ridiculous airs and graces for a girl in that position, as if just because she's pregnant means that all of her morality would have instantly disappeared. And this prejudice is really significant. The inspector even points out that this prejudiced you against her in that case. Gerald describes the women of the town who are of a lower social status as hard-eyed and door-faced women. Again, like that sexist prejudice, but also it's to do with social class, that he sees himself as superior to them. He sees himself as better than these women. So the upper classes, particularly the Burlings and Gerald, are showing these prejudices that they have about lower class people and how they see themselves as superior and better than them. Okay, my third big idea is looking at how the inspector tries to instill in the Burlings the message that with a higher social status comes a social responsibility. The inspector mentions to Mr. Burling that public men have public privileges, that because you are a man of status and a man of high society, you therefore have a responsibility to act in that manner. You should be setting an example for other people, and you should be using your social status to improve the lives of other people rather than to be demeaning them and taking things away. We have Sheila's behaviour. In Millwoods, she uses her social status to belittle Eva Smith and to take action against her, where she says that she was in a furious temper. She looked like she could take care of herself. Now, that's using the social power for negative gains, to use it to belittle someone else. Whereas what the inspector's trying to instill in her is that you have a responsibility to behave in a good manner. You have a responsibility to behave in an empathetic and sympathetic way. The way that Gerald behaves towards Daisy Renton, Sheila describes him as a wonderful fairy prince, so that with his higher social status, he can offer things to Daisy that she would never have experienced otherwise, and therefore it's creating this sort of fairy tale about himself, like the fact that he's using his social status to manipulate and to take credit for what he's doing to Daisy. So what we have is the higher social status characters are using that status for negative means, rather than using it for the responsibility that we talked about in the previous essay to try and improve the lives of those of a lower social standing. Okay, the next point I've considered is the idea that the social class is no guarantee of good morals. Now, initially, the Birdlings are seen as to be very pleased with themselves, and you can talk about things like the stagecraft. You can look at how the lighting is pink and intimate. They seem to have they've eaten their meal. They have dined well. You can use that as a metaphor. In fact, looking at how they've been the greed of society. They've taken everything from it, and the fact that they feel very superior. They feel as if they are at the peak of their powers, if you like. However, what the play reveals to us is that just because you are a member of a higher social class doesn't mean that you have better morals and that you are a good person. In fact, at the end of the play, Sheila even says, "Oh, I suppose we're all good people now," once the inspector's revealed to be either a ruse or a hoax, depending on your interpretation of that. Things like what Eric says, where he uses this euphemistic language, is a really useful phrase I find for a lot of different essay topics. I was in the sort of state when a chap easily turns nasty. He's euphemising his behaviour there. He has behaved in a very sexually aggressive manner. He has behaved in a very violent manner, and he's describing it as nasty behaviour. That's the sort of state rather than the drunken breakdown that he's had. He's trying to use that euphemistic language. Mr. Burling is concerned about the fact that there will be a public scandal and the fact that he refused her request, of course. The behaviour that he's demonstrating is very selfish, very greedy behaviour. We have Mrs. Berlin turning down this woman because she feels that it was impudent and impertinent, and the fact that Sheila says, "Actually, mother, this is a cruel and vile thing to have done." That's a really useful quote as well that you can talk about with behaviour. So just because these characters come from wealth and come from status doesn't necessarily guarantee that they have. In fact, it almost contradicts that in the fact that they have not got good behaviour. They haven't got the good morals to be able to back up their social status. Okay, finally, to wrap up this essay plan, we have the conclusion. So what I've gone for is the fact that Priestley is using the play to teach the audiences about the privileges associated with social class and how that is linked, inherently linked to the responsibility that you have as a member of an upper class person. We need to consider Priestley's audience. The majority of people who would be going to see a play would be fairly well-off people. So therefore, this is an opportunity for Priestley to teach the audience. We talked about didactic as a phrase, the fact that he's used it to teach us about the ideas. So what I've gone for is a couple of quotations to bring this together. The idea that we are members of one body, and Sheila's famous phrase, "These girls aren't cheap labour, they're people." We're now learning about how social class has a responsibility for everybody, and that metaphor about one body is really significant. About as a society, we need all parts of the body to be working correctly for us to be able to function, and every body part has its role to play in that. We have some use of dramatic irony that Priestley's done by setting his play before World War I. We have a dramatic irony of the changes in class system that occurred after the First World War and will occur again after the Second World War. The blurring of the class boundaries, how after the First World War, because of the great changes in society that happened after that, the class system that the Burlings enjoy is actually going to be coming to a close very, very soon. So lots of things that we can tie together about Priestley teaching us as an audience and what we learn about social class across the play. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is to have a look at the essay question that this essay plan will be based upon, and then I'd like you to have a look at the completed essay plan, and then your task is to either complete your own version of an essay plan, or if you prefer to have a go straight with the essay, you're more than welcome to have a go at the essay and send that to me. So have a quick look at it, see what you think, and if you stay tuned at the end, we've got today's film recommendation. Okay, so for today's film recommendation, I've gone for a horror classic from the master of horror, Alfred Hitchcock, and that's Psycho. It's it's an interesting one, Psycho. It's got some very, very iconic scenes that you'll immediately recognise and parodies that you'll recognise from elsewhere. And at the time, it was very, very shocking. And some of the violence that you see on screen or don't see on screen is actually caused a lot of outrage at the time. The plot twist is, again, one of the greatest plot twists in cinema, and it introduces some great characters that have now been refreshed and reused in the series Bates Motel. So check it out. It is an absolute classic. It's a really, really interesting film with cinematography wise and some of the fantastic shots that are in there. Next time we're going to be continuing to have a look at some Inspector Calls themes, and we might look at the idea of greed and selfishness next time. So until then, take care.